just if we could do quick intros.
I can go.
Awesome.
So I am the owner, founder, designer of Spark Interiors. And so I think I'll be celebrating my 9th anniversary in January of having my business. I went to thank you. It's like gone fast. I went to Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, and they had at the time, many years ago, you could get an emphasis in green design. And they were one of the only 3 schools at the time in the country that offered that. And I was like, what is this? So I took a little intro class and I loved it. And I decided to go. So I do have my emphasis in green design, though the education is a little possibly quite outdated because they were really highly focused on LEED in 2005, right? So it's a long time ago. But then starting my own business, I learned very quickly that you've got to make money. And I think at some point I really lost the soul of that spirit of I want to be offering sustainable choices. And it's been difficult I've rebranded. Last year we did a new website. The messaging is on sustainability. I'm really trying to use that as a draw for clients who are already leading this lifestyle, because it's really hard for me to educate people who just maybe aren't into it.
Totally. I can
That's really my focus now, is trying to get the clients who are already at least sort of considering it or are already all in. Yeah. And I think I'm really loving this group. I'm hoping I can meet more people in my area to partner with and just learn from.
We are in the same area. Yep.
Yes, we are. So
our chapter.
Yeah. So that's my little short and sweet, I guess.
Awesome. Yeah, I think just to maybe kick off the style of conversation that we're looking for here, I think one of the things you brought up that I want to respond to is that premise of working with people who are kind of already thinking about sustainability or already have decided for themselves that that's a goal. I agree with you that actually pretty early on for me, I recognize that it's just not worth my time to work with people who I have to convince that sustainability is important for. So agreed that I've basically adopted the same thing where I only work with clients who are actively committed to improving their sustainability, and actually specifically to that, committed to investing in it, right? Because it's an investment in time and resources and money to actually develop your sustainability and your acumen, right, for your business. So I think I have also ended up in the same kind of place. And I do think it's important that, it's important to apply our time wisely, right? Like the resources you develop and want to be able to offer to your clients, you don't want to be spending time on why sustainability is important at all. Though you'll see in my little presentation that I do have kind of a quick, succinct, upfront version of that, that I've developed as sort of just a reminder in those kind of usually as a kickoff part of working with clients. So yeah, awesome. Megan, thanks for being here. Looking forward to working with you more on the Colorado chapter too, because I know you're looking to get more involved, and we've actually already had some discussion earlier this morning with another person. And I think in the new year, we'll be kicking off some good investments collectively and improving the resources of the Colorado chapter. So I'm really excited for that and looking forward to working with you. Awesome. Diana, would love to hear from you.
Hi, ladies. Yes, so I'm Diana Choi. I just joined GFDA as a student member. So I was just introduced to your organization through one of my courses at Kenyatta College.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was great. So I am currently a student. I'm going to earn my certification in both interior design and the kitchen and bath design programs.
Awesome.
And I have been interested in green design for quite a while now. I previously went to graduate school for landscape architecture and regional planning because my hope was to work on brownfield sites and, maybe green roofs and living walls and things like that.
Totally.
But unfortunately, it didn't quite work out for me. So I've been trying to find, something else within the design world where I can work. And the pandemic has really sort of brought this to me, thinking about creating spaces within people's homes. So I do have other professional experience with residential construction and stuff. But this is really bringing it to okay, I want to focus on, making sustainable and enjoyable places within people's homes. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Respect the evolution too of the
Yes.
your career. Like I can empathize with that also. And I think like one of the things that I feel like is kind of interesting about ending up in sustainable design is that there aren't actually that many clear pathways. Like Megan, you even talked about, you took a class and there are little kind of breadcrumbs here and there. But it's rare that many people at this stage have gone through a significant current sustainable design program. Like I don't really know of many that exist. And if there are programs, they're kind of more generally sustainability and maybe are a little bit more about ESG and how corporate sustainability works. So I really respect and appreciate everyone's journey for getting to sustainable design, because I think it's always kind of interesting just to hear. And also, Diana, I want to point out that I did work for a landscape architecture firm for a little while too. So I have a little bit of context. My personal background, which maybe I can switch to the presentation so that I can kind of walk you through some of this, is I have a degree in architecture. So that's kind of where I came out of this from. But all of the design, have worked in interiors and architecture and then product design as well. So yeah, I appreciate the long and winding process. And I'm glad that you've joined the GFDA, because I think that in some ways, because of the fragmented nature of that and the resources and what it takes to arrive at being a sustainable designer, I think that's kind of part of why the GFDA is valuable, because it collects us in one place where we can all kind of support each other, right? I think that that's one of the things that's been very cool about working with Katie, the founder of the GFDA, since close to the end of 2020. I've been supporting her with kind of general organizational strategy for growth, but also technical resources and that sort of thing. And I think the thing that became very clear for me pretty quickly is that sort of what we're doing with the GFDA is trying to strengthen the networks of people that are out there to each other, right? I think we're not, in many cases, coming up with brand new organizations or companies or anything. It's more about, you're interested in this and here are your local resources, or here are your peers in this area, and how we can all kind of help each other identify what are the gaps that we're looking for, what don't we know that we want to research and learn and share with each other, and what are the best practices that people are stumbling upon or have been practicing for many years that we can all collectively kind of bring each other up, right? And I think one of the things that I really like about being in the sustainability space is that people are so giving of their knowledge and information. And it's partially because like we're on the same team here, right? Where we know that we are behind on being sustainable and on slowing global warming and all of that. And so it's kind of like, I really enjoy the fact that there's a very collaborative nature to being in this space, and kind of like we're all paddling in the same direction. And the more that we can elevate each other, the better everything will be. So I think it's, I don't know, that's just a moment to say that I appreciate the GFDA for that reason, and even conversations like these, right? So hopefully we can continue to support both of you. And I think Megan and Diana, please feel free again to just pipe up as I'm getting into the presentation at any point. For Dallas, you too. But I think so now I will probably switch to sharing my screen if everyone's ready for that. Does that sound good? Okay, great. So let's see. Usually I get a preview. Okay, well, we'll do that one. Great. Excellent. Oh, I just got a new laptop recently and it is asking me to, sorry, I'm gonna have to give permission to Zoom to do this real quick. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. In the meantime, I guess while you're figuring that out,
Yep.
I was just gonna say that the thing that I learned the most from like just the conversations, and I'm new to GFDA, was the fact that there isn't a clear path for sustainability, like education or a program. And it still baffles me and surprises me that there isn't like, the path of least resistance for something that's so critical, and that there's so many, corporations that are looking to do, like there is so much big interest in it. And the fact that there isn't an easy way to get to it is kind of amazing that it's not there yet.
I agree. I mean, I think that that's one of the things that, I mean, we've even been talking about. And again, what's kind of cool about the GFDA is that we're in a process of developing what people need, right? And like what people are looking for. And I think there was a question during the conference that I received about like, what are any trainings or programs you'd recommend? And honestly, I had a hard time thinking of like, I think you need kind of a specific focus in order to get a specific training that actually supports that focus. There's not kind of like here's how to become a sustainable designer. It's more like low toxin environments or low carbon projects, or in the case of the GFDA, right, low waste, which I actually don't know many low waste trainings, but there's some organizations out there that have some good resources and similar to toxin and carbon. So I think the moral of the story there that I also shared in the conference is like, if you have a focus, if you want to improve and are looking for trainings or conferences or that sort of thing, I think focusing in on what it is within sustainable design that you're interested in learning about is the first step. You can see my screen now, right? I just want to confirm that. Can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
can.
All right, great.
We were all
No
nodding
problem.
and giving thumbs up, and I realized you can't see.
I'm sorry, I can't see you at the moment. So actually I could, let's see, I can see if I can make you all, put you up here. Okay, now I get a little bit above. Great. So this slide is just a bit of a background, it's sort of a resume, background on me. So I, like I said, come from background in architecture. I think some of the like highlight real relevant experience that I have is working for a couple of years at the Google R&D lab for new campus development. That was largely focused on the fact that they were starting for the first time to build their buildings ground up, rather than just doing tenant improvement projects. And so they wanted to really invest in a significantly broad array of R&D around materials and the ways we construct things, et cetera, et cetera. So I was working there for a couple of years and ran a number of initiatives from kind of concept level through piloting with them. And so that was related to interiors, to furniture, technology integration. But one of the main reasons I was interested in working with them is that actually Google's was one of the first major organizations to really commit to sustainability in a lot of ways, and especially upfront, their kind of first wave of that was around healthy materials, because for them, it's about creating healthy environments for their employees. So that in some ways was that work with them was kind of my way of kind of having a training right on healthy materials and learning their processes. And that's where I first was exposed to ILFI, which is International Living Future Institute. And they're the ones that they have like the red list and things I'll get into later. The ILFI also runs the zero carbon certification program that I've now taken a residential renovation project almost entirely through that process. So through that, I was doing the actual carbon calculation of every fixture and finish we were looking at in these interiors. And there is an art, there's an art to that, rather than a science is what I say. Like carbon calculation, there's still kind of not a ton of information. And so sometimes you're adjusting the tool or to sort of get the outcome you're looking for. But it's been, I mean, it's still a very new program, the zero carbon certification. And I think this space is still kind of brand new, but coming out of that, I realized I had learned so much about the decarbonization principles and practices that I've been doing like a roadshow of decarbonized design talks so that more and more people can just get to know these things and have a better sensibility of like what drives the carbon footprint, right? Because it's complicated. So also I'm an advisor to the UC Berkeley Declassify the Planet course. That is a course that is in the College of Engineering Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology. It brings corporate partners, bring a sustainability challenge, and they're matched with groups of students. And then they spend a semester trying to solve that sustainability challenge. So I am sort of in a QA QC role sort of with that work, and then also just helping advance those solutions. Strategy for the Good Future Design Alliance, something I've been doing for a couple of years now. I'm also a member of the Climate Reality Leadership Corps, which is one example of, there's a training to join that. It's started and run by Al Gore. So it's somewhat based on taking kind of what was in his Inconvenient Truth movie long ago and translating that into material that people can use to represent the climate reality, as they call it, and be able to talk about that in specifics. The thing that's very cool about that actually is that I think less so the training, but more so about being in the Corps, is that once you are part of the Corps, you join a chapter, and then a lot of the work is actually related to advancing policy, which is one of the things we need more than anything else to, I mean, it makes sense, right? Al Gore, and coming from a political background, being able to advance policies on a local, state, federal level. And they actually have been a big part of advancing some things that are even playing out today. So just want to
I have a
call that
question.
out. Yeah, of course.
No, that sounds really amazing. I was going to ask, for those chapters, are those in the larger cities that are a little more progressive, for example, or are they kind of, I mean, just how is that structured?
Yeah, I think honestly, the overlap of where the GFDA chapters are and will be is it's pretty much the same. It's major metropolitan areas around the country, but you can go look at it online and look up, the training is free actually. So if you're interested, take a look. I am still new to Colorado, so I haven't actually gotten involved in the Colorado chapter of the Climate Reality Leadership Corps, but will be. And Megan, maybe you and I can keep tabs on that. Oh, Diana, are you in where are you located? Realize I don't
I'm in
wanna
the
assume.
I'm in the Bay Area, San Francisco area.
Okay, cool. Okay, helpful to know. So on the right-hand side, I talk a little bit about some of the topics that I work within. I think this might be an opportunity to talk a little bit about how to define sustainability, right? Because I think that that's actually one of the first steps, right? Sustainability is a very broad term. And so I find it really important that, and it's used in many different ways and it's gotten diluted. And so as a sustainable design consultant, I find it very important to be specific about what I mean by that. And what I mean by that is low carbon, low toxin, and low waste. And those are basically my 3 areas of expertise that I've developed largely through project work. And so I think that's sort of to the earlier discussion, right? About how does one end up as a sustainable designer or consultant? For me, it's been kind of accumulating expertise in these various areas through project work that I've worked on. And I think one of the things that has helped that is that in 2015, I basically decided that I was only going to work on projects that were sustainability related. Hard stop. So I think that's part of what has allowed me to get here. And I would say that that's actually, I think that is a strategy that I would also recommend if people are kind of looking for ways to build up more of that expertise. Is sometimes it's hard to say no to great projects, but again, I think many design projects, you can also find ways to make them about the sustainability part. Megan, to your point, if you've got a client who's on board with that. So when I say low carbon, what I mean is low emissions materials and supply chains. By low carb or low toxin, I mean healthy materials, which also of course means healthier environments and people. And low waste is renewable, recyclable, or natural materials, largely, rather than ones that are bound for the landfill. So that's a high level simplified version of that. Real quick, I'm going to go through the why. And this actually is a little bit, the way I've built this out is related to the Climate Reality Leadership Corps. That was something that we talked a lot about, which is how do you actually get people on board with some of these things and connect with them, and what's the succinct way to do it. And I think for this kind of audience, right, I go through these quickly because we know that this is a climate reality, right? We know that this is a climate reality. Many of us have experienced this version firsthand. And I think for those of us that are not for anyone who's not compelled by the environmental degradation, there are a ton of human health risks associated with climate change. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't realize or don't think about it as much, right? We think about the environment degradation, we think about the polar bears, et cetera, but actually there are very real human risks associated with it, right? And that's because rising temperatures, extreme weather, rising sea levels, increasing carbon dioxide. So I think that's also an important one. And a lot of times I've found, I mean, even with like the low toxin work, right, that personal health can be an entry point for a lot of people to sustainability, right? If they can't quite connect with some of the things that are not exactly within their present experience, like the ice caps melting, then usually human health is a good way for people to kind of think about it, right? It's a little more connected to them. It makes sense. I think this is the big headline for why anyone who works within design and building should care, right? 40% is almost half of all of the CO2 emissions worldwide. And so it's our responsibility actually to be more sustainable. And I think that these are the goalposts, right? 65% reduction by 2030. And that's shortening, right? I think the other thing that we're seeing coming out of the IPCC and COP26 is government will get us part of the way there, but it will not do all of it, right? So I think all of us as designers and companies and firms, small and large, we do need to be doing our part. And I love this as a way of succinctly saying it, right? The climate is changing and so should we. So low carbon, we'll talk about that a little bit first. And Megan, I think you've seen some of these in that Denver Design Week presentation that I was doing, but carbon in general, there's sort of two halves of the equation, right? Embodied carbon and operational carbon. Buildings have both, but embodied carbon is essentially all of the emissions that are associated from the raw material extraction, any product manufacturing, transportation, and then actually building on site. Once you turn basically an energy source on, that's when we get into the operational carbon, right? So as we transition into more and more electric buildings actually have zero carbon emissions, right? Because electricity doesn't have any combustion associated with it. So there's zero operational carbon in a fully electric building. Most buildings today in the US, though, are still working on reducing that operational carbon footprint. And so one of the kind of simple strategies that some of my colleagues who focus a lot on the energy side of this really point to consistently is switching to heat pumps, electric heat pumps, like getting your heating and cooling and water heating systems transition to an electric source rather than a fuel-based source. And so there are many other strategies, of course, like solar and batteries and things like that are part of that system or could be. Switching your appliances over to electric versions instead, also key. But as we continue to electrify our buildings, this operational carbon footprint will be going down and down, and the embodied carbon footprint will continue to be more and more important. And the embodied carbon footprint, like a lot of that, as I'll get into, comes to what are your specifications, right? Like your material choices, your product choices, where they're coming from, what they're made of, et cetera. Carbon accounting, like I said, for the zero carbon project that I did, it was my role to actually calculate the carbon footprint of a number of things. So here are a few actual examples of things that I have calculated in the past, and also just to give some quick definitions around carbon in general. There's the unit is CO2e, so that's carbon dioxide equivalent, and it includes all of both carbon dioxide, but the other major greenhouse gases. So that's something to kind of be aware of. Also, just to make it even more interesting, it's also called global warming potential, or GWP. So when you see either kilograms of CO2e or global warming potential as the unit, those are the same thing. I'm not going to go through everything on this slide because it is a longer presentation. I want to be able to like get through it and have you all ask questions. But if you do have questions on this, let me know. I think one of the other things that's pretty interesting about low carbon is, and this is where it starts to relate a bit to low waste, is that as we were talking about, the embodied carbon of something is representative of all that it takes to create a product. So the fact that we have a culture in which frequently we're still just throwing that away is incredibly wasteful, and it also wastes that embodied carbon, right? So as much as we can close that loop from something at the end of its use to becoming a new raw material, that is a very key low carbon strategy, because then that new product, when you've reused, say, those raw materials, the embodied carbon footprint of that is exceptionally low because you've just done a recycle right on that piece of it. So that's why it's important basically to think a lot about, and I'll get to this a little bit later in the presentation, but to think a lot as you're specifying something about what happens to it at its end of use. Like I was saying, I think I'm going to hide this just a little bit so I can see my slides a little bit better. So materials are really key, and this is one of my favorite free resources. It's called the Carbon Smart Materials Palette, and I highly encourage you to just do a tour, like read all of the different pieces of what's on this website. This is a screenshot from it. So you can click into each of these materials and it basically talks about ways to decarbonize them. And for example, with concrete, what we're doing basically is trying to replace the Portland lime cement with cement, what they call cementitious supplementary materials, which are basically like right now there's glass aggregate is being used, fly ash is being used. And what we're basically doing is taking Portland lime cement, which is a very high carbon material because it's been fired over and over. So that's like the literal emissions building up over the time of firing things. Rather than having that, what you're looking at are using waste stream materials for that replacement. And you work with a structural engineer, as you'll look at if you click into here. You have to work with a structural engineer to get permission for how much of that you can replace so that it still has the structural integrity it needs. But that's an example of the type of thing that they offer in each one of these categories. And I think they do a great job of trying to make it pretty simple. So if you're thinking about decarbonizing your major building materials, I highly recommend that you check out this website. I think the other high level strategy is that plant-based materials, what they're calling carbon smart materials, as plants grow, they sequester carbon, right? So that's the process of photosynthesis. And so when you use anything that's natural or plant-based, like bamboo or wood or straw or hemp or wool, you're actually not wool, but not a plant, but you're using materials that start out as carbon negative. So when you harvest them, they're carbon negative because they've actually drawn down carbon from the atmosphere, right? And that's a very, very different math equation than using a petroleum-based material that is high carbon in just creating the raw material itself, right? Not to mention the actual making of the product. So that's one other key, very key strategy. And I'm guessing that you all have probably seen this too, but there is a lot going on right now of as far as products being released onto the marketplace that are going to be very real competitors to your standard high carbon insulation, or which like you're seeing some of this down in the carbon smart materials, right? Like hempcrete or cork or sheep's wool in some cases. There are a ton of things out there. And actually, I think that's one of the kind of exciting things going on right now is I have some that I'm aware of, but there are just constantly more coming out. And so I think that's another thing that I'm looking forward to working with the GFDA and this community on is how to keep each other aware of the latest and greatest as they continue to come out. But I think the good news is we're living in a time when people are, these things are arriving in the market, right? Because there have been many years where people who wanted to do something sustainable really didn't have those options.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So for cork, this is a long time ago. I remember hearing cork was something hard to come by. Is that not the case? Or because it's a natural product and I think it's tree bark of some kind, right? And was that something that is easy, like how bamboo is prolific? Is cork prolific as well?
It's a good question. So there are a couple of good questions in there. Cork had a moment like a few years ago, actually. And I think it didn't quite have the demand at the time that people were hoping. And so I think, Firdaus, you're right that and I've actually had this experience personally. We bought this house in this summer. We wanted to specify cork for some of our floors. And it took a long time to actually find some companies that were carrying the product currently. Many of them like had it one time, and supply chain issues were certainly a piece of this, but it is findable. We have it installed in our bedroom, and more going into more rooms downstairs. So cork is out there. I think you might have to search around a little bit, but there are great products, and it is a pretty cool material in that it's kind of like sheep's wool, actually, because it's kind of like something that the tree just grows and sort of sloughs off on a regular basis. So you can harvest it and it will kind of grow it back the same way that wool might, right, on a sheep or something. So it's renewable in that way. I think over the lifetime of that tree, which is pretty long, it's less readily available than bamboo, because bamboo is like a fast growing short cycle crop that's widely present throughout the world. Cork is largely sourced from Portugal, though there are a few other places that have it. But the key, of course, kind of related to like FSC certified wood, right? You want to make sure that it's sustainably harvested. The good news is that cork is kind of already sustainable in the way that it's harvested, but it is important that we're not decimating the cork forests in Portugal, right? And I do think that that's not really an issue now, but it's something that you hope they're looking out for and thinking about how it can be as sustainably harvested as possible. But at its baseline, it is a great renewable, sustainable material, low carbon too. So this is the piece on supply chains. This is where carbon starts to connect to those. So the methods we use to transport products are a huge driver in the carbon footprint of something, right? So, and it's actually like the furthest away from the ground, the lowest on the ground, is that correlates to the highest carbon footprint and the lowest carbon footprint. So planes are much higher than anything else except for spaceships, which are exponentially higher than that. But then you have trucks, and then rails, and then ocean freight. And all of these you should consider these like the freight version, right? Not the just a boat or a truck. I think the other strategy is avoiding rush shipping, which usually means that your product will arrive a little bit more slowly, but it is an important strategy. And I think in order to achieve a low carbon supply chain, or you can either have it arrive more slowly, or you need to manage your project basically to know what things are coming from furthest away that might need to come via boat rather than an airplane, right? And those 2 days is very different from a month. And that's kind of what that via boat or via plane from another continent looks like, right? And then the other thing that's a key obvious strategy is that the closer you buy it to yourself, like the closer you're sourcing to where you and your project are, the less miles traveled and the lower the carbon footprint of that supply chain will be. So these are some pretty simple ones that are actually like very quick to put into practice. I'm going to move kind of quickly at this point through some of these. This is Tally. If you're interested, if you do use Revit, this is a plugin that you can get for Revit, and it will track. You can see along the x-axis here a number of different categories that it tracks. You'll see here's a great application of the thing we were just talking about. This says global warming potential. So this is what they're calling the carbon footprint, right? It also tracks a number of other things. And I think it's a pretty cool tool for being able to compare options in the early design stage. So yeah, recommend that. I think the other thing so this is related more to the operational carbon of a building, right? So the energy sources that you're choosing. One of the key headlines about electrification, because some people are sort of ask why you would do that anyway. And these are some of the highlight reasons why. It's safer, it's healthier, it's more efficient, and it's cost saving. So I'll get into that a little bit. This is basically the Rocky Mountain Institute, great organization and research body, they kind of consistently release white papers and that sort of thing. And this is about basically proof of the fact that electrification reduces the cost over the lifetime of ownership compared with the same functions with fossil fuels, right? So you can see maybe in here, it's about comparing heat pumps to natural gas with an existing air conditioner or new AC, but in a number of different locations. So yeah, there's evidence. I think the other thing, if you're interested in learning more about carbon, this is my other favorite free resource, which is Drawdown. They released, there's a lot on this website, and I, again, encourage you to go check it out. They released something called the Drawdown Review, which takes a lot of research and distills it kind of into an update in 2020, and that's a really nice starting place. But they also now have videos that in some ways could function as training, actually. And then the website itself is organized basically into sectors, and they've come up with the top 100 solutions that can actually help us achieve the 65% reduction, holding ourselves to below the 1.5 degrees Celsius level by 2030. So the first most important solution is onshore wind turbines. The exciting thing is that actually we've already seen the Biden administration put this into practice, right? These are new headlines, like they are building them offshore, and good thing, because that's our number one most important strategy, right? You can see how I recommend that you go check out this list and see which one of these you're interested in, and you can click into any of them and learn more. The International Living Future Institute, other amazing organization. Like I've mentioned, I've worked with them through a few different programs. Living Building Challenge is one. The Zero Carbon Certification is another. Declare certification is actually their certification for products, which is more related to low toxin. And they've got a great red list, which I think I've even got in this slide deck. This is kind of a quick summary. I'll move through here, but yeah, let's get into low toxin. Let me do a quick time check also. Chemicals aplenty, heavily underregulated, right? Very, very few of them are regulated. And so this is the context that we all operate within. There are lots of chemicals out there that we know are toxins, but are not regulated. And so I think one of my favorite strategies to use is actually California's Prop 65 policy, which many of us have seen over and over again and just ignore, right? If something carries a Prop 65 warning label, it's because it contains toxins that are known to be damaging to human health, which is a list that California updates on a regular basis, I think on an annual basis. And if a product is sold in the state and carries one of those ingredients, it has to hold a Prop 65 label. So this is actually one of the best free tools that's available to all of us. Fortunately, it applies to all the other states they sell things to. And this is a great kind of sorting mechanism, I think. In the background of the Prop 65 is this organization, the Green Science Policy Institute, also a great resource, totally free videos online. They've got 6 classes of chemicals that they encourage us all to track. And you can watch the video and learn more about them, each of them, and the strategies you can use to avoid them with your clients. This is the Living Building Red List, Living Building Challenge Red List, and from the International Living Institute that I was talking about. This is also free, fully published, and it is kind of their version. I think it's a more in-depth version than Prop 65, but kind of similarly, it's a list of red list ingredients that we don't want to see in products, but are maybe not regulated otherwise. And you can always, if you can get the information for a product, you can go look at this list and see if any of those are on the red list. I think the other thing that's important to point out is that sustainability and environmental justice have a very cool connection, which is low toxins in the environment also mean low toxins in our communities, right? Anyone who lives next to a factory making anything toxic is breathing that in. And so there's a key, and their waters, I mean, there's the degradation goes a lot further than just the air, right? But it's a very important thing for our communities also. And Earth Justice, I think, is a very, such an incredible organization. They've got a great tagline, because the earth needs a good lawyer. And they do a lot of great kind of grassroots organizing. This is a super cool article about a successful campaign they did in Newark, New Jersey, where they supported this grassroots organization and actually which was in a neighborhood next to the Covanta incinerator, and they had noticed it was like burning pink smoke at one point, and so they were trying to basically say like, we're pretty sure that's not legal. And Earth Justice came in and helped them and actually successfully changed policy and was able to get the state of New Jersey to actually regulate them more strictly. So if you're interested in learning more about that piece of it, I highly recommend Earth Justice. Similarly related, right? PFA is kind of what I was talking about earlier. We now know, oh, where did that slide go? There it is. So we now know that they did this. This is an article that I also recommend. They sampled water across the US basically and found a lot of toxic chemicals in it, including PFAs. PFAs you're probably hearing more about, and actually we're currently in the process, I think, of trying to get them regulated. I believe that there are even bills that have been proposed to start regulating it, but currently they're really not, and they're known as these forever chemicals that we really are trying our hardest to regulate. They're also part of the 6 classes of chemicals that the Green Science Policy Institute talks about. So if you want to learn more about those, go back to those Green Science Policy Institute videos and start there, and you'll learn about kind of where they are typically and how to avoid them. But you can see stain resistant fabric, nonstick pans, etc. This is about the kind of climate justice movement and how we can move from extractive and exploitive as about it being our model of making things and building things to one that is more equitable and regenerative. And this, I think, is an awesome example of work that's being advanced pretty significantly right now. And we're seeing this affect Fortune 500 companies too, even right now. It's exciting actually to hear some of them even using the words equitable and regenerative, right? Okay, so that's low toxin. I think the question that I often ask is, does this contain chemicals? Are there natural alternatives? That's one of the ways to try to make it simpler. And low waste, of course, is what the GFDA focuses mostly on. And so it's about preventing ourselves from turning this directly into, my timing, this into that, right? So not just a one-way street from extraction to a landfill pile. And Katie talks about this, the Earth Overshoot Day, right? Like we're using the Earth's resources at a rate faster than it can regenerate them. And so the Earth Overshoot Day is the day that we've passed that mark, basically. It's also a pretty cool website I recommend checking out. Already talked about this. One of the keys to low waste though, right, in that loop is recycling. And so it's important to know what materials are actually recyclable or not. And that's something that I'm constantly looking into as I'm reviewing materials, right? And it does vary sometimes where you are, but some of these things are just a basic thing. Yes, this can be recycled, or no, this can't be recycled, right? So glass and metal, recycled infinitely, no downgrade in material. Plastic, every time
important to know. Good job. Like
every time you recycle plastic, it degrades. Yeah.
Amazing.
And it is that simple, you know, but no one, certainly not the plastic industry, ever makes it that simple. Or seem that way. This is just advice to go check out a recycling center if you can, because you'll learn a lot about what this actually looks like. This is the one in the East Bay that I went to in the Bay Area, Davis Street Center. And you just learn a lot more about recycling as a marketplace. It's not just a place things go. They take that is their product, and then they sell that on a marketplace, whatever these materials are that we're recycling, right? And the important thing to know is that only some materials are actually, there is a demand for on that marketplace. And it's basically, of all the plastics, it's pretty much just plastics 1 and 2. They're obviously though, and you've probably heard this, like they still claim that 3 through 7 maybe technically are recyclable, but right now they're mostly being piled up in landfills or incinerated, right? PVC number 3 is an actual human, like a known toxin. So I've read that one out because just avoiding PVC at all costs is something that I'm constantly trying to do, though it's in a lot of building materials still, right? And so this is where it comes back to, it's on us to educate ourselves so that we can make better decisions within the context of a lot of things that are still offered on the marketplace that are maybe either high carbon, high waste, or high toxin like PVC. I think it's also important to talk about other resources that we don't want to waste, like water, right? It's kind of insane that in the US, we flush our toilets with drinking water, right? That's silly, given that we're all basically drawing from the same 1%, I believe. I can't remember the stat actually off the top of my head at the moment, but it's a very, very low percentage of potable water that's actually available to humans on Earth, right? Desalinization is heavy and energy intensive. We don't, as much as possible, we want to be respectful and resourceful with the water we have, right? So what's kind of interesting about this is that as much as we can do gray water or rainwater capturing, there are some states that actually still don't legally allow it. I think the other thing, right, is that low waste, using waste streams or things that are secondhand or vintage or salvage, that's a very excellent way to specify something that, as you maybe remember, is also low carbon, but is less wasteful. And there are so many good, I mean, your local vintage, antique, consignment, et cetera shops, but also there's some great online marketplaces, right? And these are some of them. I also personally think, especially from the interior design perspective, that you get more interesting, full of character things, right, when you go secondhand or vintage. And these are, again, some kind of baseline strategies for going low waste that I talk about. And maybe I'll go through these just because it's a GFDA conversation. Specifying natural or recyclable, not landfill bound, right? So again, asking ourselves, where is this going at the end of use? Because natural ones will compost or naturally degrade. Recyclable ones will enter that closed loop recycling system, right? No material blends is another interesting strategy. So in textiles, for example, so you can't recycle something that has been blended together so much that it isn't recyclable, basically. So even in, like, for example, with textiles, like I was going to talk about, a 100% polyester, even though that's a petroleum-based product, that is a recyclable material because it is a 100%, and it's better than a 25% polyester, 10% rayon, 30% hemp. Like, even if you've got some good natural materials in there, if they've all been blended together, that material is landfill bound. It's neither compostable nor recyclable. So I think that's an example of, that's a nice little strategy that I like to think about and use when I'm looking at the material ingredients. Design for deconstruction is a very key one, because as we make something, we need to be able to take it apart into its disparate pieces to be able to recycle it or properly manage that waste. And that, what that comes down to basically is mechanical fasteners rather than adhesive connections, right? Reducing overages, only use what you need, right? Conserving resources, which we just talked about. Water is a great example of that, but of course, so are forests. That's why we specify FSC certified wood, right? Because they're actively conserving those resources as they are drawing from them for the raw materials. Recycling is key, reuse is key. And then finally, actually, interestingly enough, I like to include food waste, because when you go look at drawdown and look at all the strategies for reducing the carbon, our collective carbon footprint, reducing food waste is a huge one, because food emits methane as it degrades, and methane is 28 plus times more powerful than even carbon dioxide. And so reducing food waste is actually a pretty key thing. So compost infrastructure is really one of the best ways you can manage that, right? When you compost something, those methane emissions are managed and reduced as it composts, rather than just kind of openly emitting in the landfill. So even though it's somewhat disconnected from the buildings industries, it's not in some ways, right? We also see ways in which we interact with food and food waste. So I will stop, I think, there, because I want to hear more from you all, but I think there are a number of other benefits, and for larger companies, ESG investment is interesting, as well as policies like extended producer responsibility. This is a different take on an economic model where we exist between fixed boundaries and resources, what people need and what's available on Earth, rather than this continuous uphill GWP growth curve that we look at all the time. That's not sustainable, right? So these are three of the key takeaways. Low carbon design, critical to reverse global warming. Low toxin is healthier for everyone and also enables recycling. I think that's the other ways these things are connected. Heavy toxin materials can't be recycled over and over again, right? So I think that's another way that these are work together. Low waste is also low carbon, and it's important that we're conserving. So yeah, with that, I think I'd like to just hear from you all a little bit more. So I'll mute myself and let you all talk.
Thank you, Imani. Thank you so much. I have a question in the chat from Megan. Megan, do you either want to ask it or do you want me to ask it for you? Okay, well, Megan was asking, we would love to have some resources for both calculating carbon as well as offset programs. So
Yep.
Imani, go for it.
So the program that I used for this past project it's called eTool. And part of the reason I chose that one is because it has more information on the carbon footprints of interior finishes and fixtures, because some of them really don't have that information at all. And it's largely because for whatever reason, eTool has that information. It's called Eurasia is where it's from, or it's Australia and Asia. For whatever reason, they've developed more, they've provided more inputs of carbon footprinting information. And so, like I said, it's still kind of an early stage of, it's an art, not a science, right? We're still getting the information we need in order to be able to do the calculations. So there's a bit of a dearth of information out there, but eTool is one of the ones that I landed on for that reason, but there are other tools out there. Offsets, I think, are gold standard. So I've worked with a couple of colleagues who are experts in the space and they're auditors of carbon offsets. Basically what you're looking for is third-party verified. So Green E verified is one kind of sorting mechanism, but also this colleague of mine, he basically just recommended gold standard as a starting place. So if you look up gold standard carbon offsets, you'll see their marketplace online. I actually personally offset my carbon footprint every year using gold standard. It is not as expensive as you would think it would be. I think there are other resources out there. There are great ones, TerraPass, there's a marketplace out there, but you do want to do a little bit of homework. It's an unfortunate thing that there have been some less trustworthy organizations within this space. And so that's why I think a lot of us have gotten to a place of just looking for third-party verification, basically. So yeah, those are some resources I think on that topic. Anything else before we kind of wrap up here? Yeah. And I can stay on for a couple more minutes too.
Okay, so I recently wrote a very short research paper on like insulation, for example.
Nice.
And I took like 2 non-organic materials and I took 3 organic materials and ones that are like the hemp and the sheep's wool. Amazing. And stuff. And it was really interesting because there wasn't necessarily like a clear answer of what is the best product, because there was always like some kind of you were accommodating somehow, yeah. Or basically there were some issues. Well, so I have a friend who's building a new house in in New York on the Hudson River area.
Lovely.
And so I asked him, I said, well, what are you using for your insulation, or what's the developer using? And he said it's the spray foam kind. And I was like, whoa. And I didn't do that as part of my research, but I was like, I already know it's plastic, it's but
petrochemical.
One of the
and it also
problems,
adheres to materials.
It does. And so it's really difficult if you want to alter anything at some point, and you can't recycle it. I mean, it's only that one usage. So I was trying to tell him about embodied energy and like recyclable, and he's doing so much already in it. His argument was basically, this gives us the highest R value and it makes a difference in our climate. And so they're trying to create, a pretty tight envelope. Yep. And then I think their heating is going to be all electric, but they're not able to get 100% away from natural gas. But it's like his argument is, well, we're losing, it's so much more energy efficient. So like we're going to have a positive impact, but then and I was like, basically you're putting this toxic substance into your walls, which we don't really know the off gas, like if the off gassing could be longer term and create an unhealthy breathing environment and everything else. So it's
Totally.
like, what do you say when somebody has that argument that it's like, this is so much more energy efficient because it immediately achieves an R value of like 30 something in walls versus,
Yep.
you know, I was trying to argue for maybe like, what is it called?
Cork
Wool rock?
Oh,
Rock wool.
Rock wool's great. That is
Rock
recyclable
wool,
too.
it's mostly recycled. It's like 95%
Yep.
recycled. It does have a higher embodied energy, but it's like, it is also, it can be recycled.
Recyclable. Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
recyclable and recycled. And it's like, there's just,
Exactly.
you know, it has one of the highest R values amongst the other materials. So it's
Right.
like, what do you say when somebody has that argument? Like, but we're achieving more energy efficiency here. So we have a tighter building and blah, blah, blah.
It's a really, really good question, Dinah. I think because this is it's a rich topic and there isn't a clear solution. It sort of depends on your priorities, honestly. I
Yeah.
think, and this is where it matters in each project to define what it is that you are prioritizing within sustainability, right? Is it healthy materials? Is it low carbon, or is it low waste, or any other topics that matter to your client? Because that's what you come back to when you have these kinds of conversations with people, right? If they were prioritizing healthy materials, then in this
Yeah.
case, it would be wise to say, these are made of known toxins. It's a petrochemical. You're right that there are also ways in which, like from a low waste perspective, spray foam is terrible because it's pretty hard to get off of materials. But what's interesting actually is, so Cottonwood Builders, they're an amazing general contractor here in Colorado that I've, in some ways, I think they're among the best that I've ever seen at diversion. They make the same argument. They use spray foam and they use the same argument, which is an energy efficient building is going to save more over the long term than a less energy efficient building. And I think it really does come down to the fact, like, this is why we all have jobs, is that it is complex. You know, it's not just this is an obvious solution and this one's obviously better than that one. It's complex and it depends on the project. And like, so for myself, I do try to avoid obviously petrochemical and petroleum based materials as much as humanly possible. But in some cases, there are areas maybe you wouldn't be able to access with other insulation, or to their point, like if what they're going for is as high energy efficiency as possible, that unfortunately petrochemical products, right, plastic and petroleum based products, a lot of them do have some performance traits that are very hard for natural materials to meet. And so that's when you have to kind of come back to the greater picture and decide, okay, so in this instance, if that's what you're going for, yes, it's true that this spray foam might win in this case. But if you look at it from these other perspectives, this is why it's not as good. And it ultimately comes down to a choice, right? And I think I mean, you're doing the right thing. You're educating yourself on it. You're educating them on it so that they can make a better informed decision. And in some cases, their choice may be to go with the spray foam because they'd like to optimize their energy efficiency of their home. And someone could do that calculation, right, of how much they're putting in. If you compared one material to another, what would the carbon footprint be? And then you could also make a toxic
they could actually
environment.
figure it out. Because it's like, I mean, one of the arguments could also be like, you don't have to go so much in excess. You know, it's like, you know, maybe achieving this R value is actually perfectly good for your climate. And it's like that bigger is better, kind of like it's that mentality of bigger is better. So like, you know, this is a higher number, so it must be a better product, or it must be
exactly.
You know.
And I think like the petroleum industry has been really good and strategic, honestly, about creating products and then creating standards and ways that we vet things in which their products win, right? Or have the best looking numbers. It also, your comment reminded me of kind of the way that we talk about durability, because that's another case that petrochemical products are often like pretty durable, although until they're not, right? And the funny thing is they've set us up for this expectation that things need to last for 50 years when we're honestly refreshing spaces at a much higher rate than that. And we don't need many of these things to last that long, right? It's actually probably better to have a natural material like, and now I'm talking about maybe something more like furnishings, like interior furnishings or textiles or something like that. Like it actually may be better to specify something natural and then replace it when it wears out, because that can be composted or recycled rather than something that is always going to be made of chemicals, and even when it one day degrades will leave a little puddle of chemicals behind, right? Like I think that's the argument that I come back to a lot with petrochemical based things is, okay, you may get some benefits, whether it's durability or longevity or lightweightness or cost or whatever it is, but there are all these other side effects that's really important for us to be aware of, which is once we create it, we can't take it back, right? It creates those petrochemicals, it creates those toxins that are with us on our planet forever. And that's where the natural materials kind of always win, right?
Right.
Is that when we make them, they return to the earth eventually and they're not toxic, right? And that is a closed loop, sustainable system. And I think the fortunate thing is that we are moving that way, right? As I was saying at the beginning, like more and more companies are focusing on making those materials now. And that's what's super exciting. But also I would really love to see your article.
Oh, it's just a paper for school. It's not that interesting. But
I
it's
would
good
still
'cause
like to see it.
Yeah. Okay. I'll send
Yeah,
it
if
to
you could share it to me, I would love to see it, because I think insulation is, I love talking about that category actually, because it is one of the ones that we have new opportunities coming available and products that are on the market that are reliable and great. Rockwool is a good example. Cork is another one that I've used in different projects or helped specify for other projects. And they're better alternatives. And to your point, like they have enough R value, right? Enough is a certain level. And beyond that, also to your point, may not really be that necessary, right?
Right. And I also, it's funny because I checked like LEED guidelines and I was like, oh man, LEED guidelines actually do, like you could still be LEED platinum or whatever and have sprayed foam. And it's like, I feel like that's another check in that column. And it's like, oh, if LEED says it's okay, then, it's good. We're good. It's good. It's been completely vetted, and there's
I do think
concerns about health or what kind of an indoor environment it creates or whatever.
Yeah. And I think I really appreciate LEED for being kind of first at the table on certifications, but I do not think that they're the highest level anymore. And I refer people to ILFI for what I think is the current best that integrates both. So like Living Building Challenge or any of their other building certification programs, they do hold things to a slightly higher level. But again, it is the complexity that keeps us all kind of in this space. And as designers, right, we're always trying to, we're navigating things, right? We're navigating priorities, and it's problem solving is the whole process of design. And these are some of the challenges that we're constantly kind of having to weigh. So yeah, I think all your points are super valid, and I look forward to seeing your paper. And let's connect again more in the future. If you
do you want to give me your email now, or do you want
yeah, it's up on the screen here actually.
Oh yes, it is right now. Imani,
first name at
design. Okay, I got it.
So much.
Thank you so much for this.
Absolutely, it was a pleasure to have you here. I'm glad that you're lit up and excited about these things and writing papers, and that's what matters most. It's good to have you on the team.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm so glad I attended today.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
So happy to have met you too. Thank you. Thank you for staying on.
All right.
Yeah, awesome. And welcome to the GFDA.
Thank you. All right. You ladies
Awesome.
take care.
Okay.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.